Cool. Hey guys, how are ya? Good, I'm Tarryn, and this is my husband Nick, and we're from Generation Health. And our office is actually based on the shore, but we also work online, so we're everywhere where there's Wi-Fi. So today I wanted to come in and talk to you guys about hormones. So you guys are all members at this gym? Okay, awesome. So when you train here, are you all working towards some specific goals? Yeah, okay, cool. Well, I thought before I got started into some content that I'd talk to you a little bit about myself so that you know who you're talking to. So my journey with my own health has been one specifically to do with weight loss. I used to be 84 kilos at my heaviest. I didn't even get that heavy before I had him. Actually, this is really exciting for me because this is my third trip out of the house since I had my baby last week. So it's a little bit of an outing, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so it's been a weight loss journey for me. I knew nothing about food at all. Nutrition was a very foreign concept to me. I pretty much just, so long as I was satisfied and wasn't hungry, then I was good, right? As a teenager, that's pretty much how most teenagers think these days. I went to go and see a doctor, and he took my weight and told me that I was clinically obese, and that just completely rocked my world. I had no idea how that had even happened because I was quite fit. You know, I played a lot of netball. I used to play for a club in Gleneden, and one of the teams I played in was a premier team, and I was also playing for two other teams in my club, which meant I was playing for 3 teams. Can you imagine how much training I was doing? I was training a lot, sometimes 4 to 5 times a week, and then games all day Saturday. So my fitness was definitely up there, but still quite heavy. So have you come across that before, where you've seen people who are quite heavy but they've also been quite fit, or they've been quite small but unfit? So it's traditionally, when you take a look at someone, it's not always as self-explanatory as what you may think. So that's where my journey really started. I addressed my nutrition straight away. Just tried a few things just by myself. I'd stopped putting sugar in everything, and within the first month I lost 6 kilos, which was the first time I'd ever lost any weight. Now for me, growing up, I'd always been a little bit heavier and just continued to get heavier. My mum would take me to the doctor and he'd take my weight. It would always be getting higher, but I just thought that was normal and that's what I was predisposed to. It wasn't until I'd had that last trip to the doctor where he told me that I was obese that I actually really needed to address it. So, being the first time that I'd ever lost any weight, it made me think about how much I didn't know about nutrition, and that was where I really started on my journey to learn a little bit more. Now, I know that nutrition's a real big, it's massive, and everyone's got their own opinions on how nutrition should go these days. You can do your own Googling and do your own online searching and see so many different ideas about different diets and things. But the way I really wanted to address it, and the way that I learned about it, is to take a look at what health actually means. Okay, so health is actually very quantifiable. A lot of the time people think that health means something different to everybody. Okay, so while someone has one idea of health, someone else may have a completely different concept of health. And I really want to tell you that health is completely measurable. Okay, it's totally measurable. And how we measure it is by the health of our glands. Okay, so our organs. So when I talk about hormones, does anyone have, did you all have kind of an idea that hormones have something to do with it and that they're super important, but we don't really know what hormones do? Metabolism? Okay, when it comes to fat loss? Okay, so the metabolism is controlled by your thyroid, which is a gland. And generally when we think about the metabolism, we're thinking about whether someone has a quick one or a slow one in terms of how their body deals with fat. Is it going to burn fat quickly, or is it really slow and then going to result in someone who is overweight? Well, the metabolism's more than just that. The metabolism's actually how quick everything is turning over. Okay, so if we look at what we're made up of, which is just trillions of cells. Cells are either turning over really quickly or they're turning over slowly. So you might see, like in a baby, for example, the skin's nice and plump, everything's real healthy, young people recover a lot quicker than older people. The cells are turning over quite quickly. So if someone has something happening there that's not fully functional with the thyroid, it will result in a slower metabolism. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an underactive thyroid, it just means that the thyroid can be a little bit sluggish. Yeah? So when we talk about hormones, I'm gonna use this board and try and get as visual as I can, because it helps to see pictures so that you can remember it better. Now, I'm not a very good drawer, so we're going to go with stick figures. Okay, so when we look at why the body wants to store fat in the first place, it's really, really good to understand why this is, so that when you want to lose body fat, you can address it in the way that is most relevant to you, okay? Because you would notice that different people store fat in different areas, right? You notice different people have different body shapes. What are some areas that some people might be predisposed to carrying their fat? What are some shapes that you might see? Pear-shaped? Yep, so mostly in the lower half of the body. Yep, what are some other shapes that you might see? What are other areas that where someone might carry their body fat? So we've got pear-shaped in the lower half. Yep. Where might be another area that someone could store fat? All around. Yep, globally. Yep. And also around the midsection. Yep. So after this talk, what will happen is you'll go around people watching and you'll just look at people's different body shapes and you'll be like, oh, I know why that is. Okay, so when it comes to why the body stores fat, it's really about protecting your organs. Okay, so have you heard that before? That fat is a survival mechanism. Have you heard of that before? Yeah? Not really? Okay. Well, fat is a survival mechanism. What it's trying to do is to protect your vital organs. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the main glands, and we're going to have a look at the hormones that they're responsible for. All right, so if we just take a real basic concept of what a hormone does, they're just messages. So every single thing that your body does is being told to be done by a hormone. All right, and glands produce each and every one of those hormones. Now, if we take a look at the first body shape that was mentioned, the pear shape, which is the main organ that sits in that area of the body? Does anyone know? The ovaries. Yep, so we've got the ovaries here. Now, which hormones does the ovaries, what are they responsible for? Which two? Estrogen? Yep. And what's the other one? Progesterone. Okay, now when someone is accumulating fat in this lower half of the body, it's always a problem with this hormone. Okay, it's always estrogen. Now, this is different to just a body shape where you've got someone who's, if you take someone who's Latino, for example, and they're curvy and they've got, like that body shape. It's different. The fat must be a cellulite kind of fat. Okay, so where you've got the fat on the saddlebags or on the butt, on the insides of the thigh, and it's a cellulite looking fat. Okay, when it's that body shape, we're always dealing with estrogen being a problem. Okay, now there's a bunch of different reasons why your body might overproduce estrogen. You'll notice that you don't really see this shape on men, right? You don't really see a pear-shaped guy. And if you did, it would be very uncommon, and it would be ever so slight, and you'd kind of look at him and you'd go, it's a strange shape for a guy, and you can't quite put your finger on it. But what you'd see is fatty chest, and they'd be a bit heavier around this area, and kind of have hips, which looks a little bit strange. And that's it's a different reason that the body is producing more estrogen when it comes to a guy. It's more the things that are an accumulation of synthetic hormones. For example, eating a lot of animal, like chickens that have been pumped full of hormones, or eating a lot of foods that are synthetic, like artificial artificial beverages and artificial sweeteners, anything synthetic like that actually mimics the hormone estrogen. Okay, so when it comes to us females, if we take a look at a fat cell looks like, let's say it just looks like a simple circle, all right? But we have over 1,000 more times the type of fat cells that have what's called receptors to estrogen. So what that looks like is this, but it has a little missing puzzle piece, okay? And estrogen, the hormone, looks like a cross. Now guess where that fits? Right into here. Okay, so if we have over 1,000 more times as females the ability to have fat cells which have receptors to estrogen, it means that when we produce this hormone, this is where it's going to sit right in. And so, you know, and we need this for reproductive function, and that's why we menstruate and have babies and so forth, and that's great. But what can happen is if there's an accumulation of things that are synthetic or artificial in our diet, or that are coming into the body, you know, even just through the skin, what happens over a period of time is that our body starts to mimic estrogen. Okay, so what that looks like is this. Same shape, but imagine it's just a little bit fuzzy on the outside. Okay, so it's mimicking estrogen, but because it's the same shape, it fits right into that little slot. Okay, so when it comes to a guy looking this way, we know that it's from the consumption of things that are heavily artificial, and the liver is quite loaded. Okay, so the other things that would trigger excessive estrogen for a female, you know, can be things as complicated as polycystic ovaries or conditions of the actual ovary. But other things can be, you know, more commonly, the things that can cause an excessive amount of estrogen is simply that the body is not able to excrete estrogen, and so we're recycling it. Okay, so what happens is that the liver, let's just say that's the liver, the liver is responsible for metabolizing fat. Okay, what that means is it's got to turn fat into a form that your body can actually excrete. So kind of like, you know, when you're washing the dishes and you're trying to wash grease off a plate, it simply won't rinse away. You've got to use dishwashing liquid, and that's the liver's job. Okay, so when it comes to estrogen, this type of fat that sits in this area of the body where there is not as much circulation as up here where your vital organs are, is what would be considered a more resistant fat. Okay, so if the liver is really loaded with doing a whole bunch of other things, it will not prioritize metabolizing fat, most especially the estrogenic kind. So what happens is that monthly, as you come into your cycle and your estrogen levels start to naturally rise before you ovulate, what will happen is that instead of the body excreting it, it'll just recycle it, and the best way that it can deal with it out of the bloodstream is to store it in your fat. Okay, and then what can happen is that you're dealing with the previous month's lot of estrogen as well. So guess what symptoms you'll experience at that time? PMS, cramping, and some other things that we won't scare the boys with, but some quite common symptoms, all right, that are directly related to just this issue here. Okay, so that's just this body shape. If we take a look at one of the another body shape, which is just where you're storing fat around the midsection, your kidneys. So say your kidneys are here. Just above the kidneys, you've got two little glands called your adrenal glands. Okay, we heard of your adrenal glands before? Yeah, your adrenal glands are responsible for producing which hormones? I'll give you a clue. It sounds like adrenal. Adrenaline. Okay, so they are responsible for adrenaline, which is the fight or flight hormone. Okay, so typically this hormone is being produced when you either get a fright, or if you are, you know, running from something that is threatening your life, or if traditionally in this scenario where you are in a state of panic, or if you trip and fall and your body needs to respond very quickly, that is typically how adrenaline should be produced. Okay, typically. Another hormone that it is responsible for is cortisol. So have you heard of cortisol before? No? Yes, some of you? Cortisol is an anti-inflammatory hormone. So you know, like when you take Nurofen, how it's anti-inflammatory? Well, that's a synthetic version of what your body naturally produces. Okay, so cortisol is a natural anti-inflammatory. So if there's anything, anywhere at all in the body that is causing any type of inflammation, you will produce cortisol. Okay, so what happens is that when these glands get overworked, when they become tired, if they're working too hard, then our body starts to store fat around that gland to protect it. Okay, so this is the survival thing that we're talking about. Now, I always heard that fat was a survival mechanism, and I'm thinking, seriously, I live in New Zealand, in the land of abundance. There's no, there's no survival, trigger here. But what's actually happening is that the glands become so tired and become weak that fat must accumulate around it in order to protect that gland. So what we start to see is fat around the midsection. Okay, now, let's say that we hear of things like, have you heard of adrenal fatigue? Okay, so adrenal fatigue is when the glands have been sluggish for so long that they continue to get weaker and weaker, and when it's continuously not addressed, they continue to get weaker still, just like anything would, until one day the gland actually just packs itself in, and that's what's considered adrenal fatigue. Okay, now it's interesting because if you get cortisol levels tested in a blood test, it's very difficult to test for cortisol because your body will actually have cortisol levels managed in the blood, and so when you test for it to be testing positive, the gland actually needs to be 9/10 destroyed before it will even show up in a blood test. Okay, so you must be familiar with type 2 diabetes, right? So diet-related onset diabetes. Now, what we're looking at there is the pancreas once it has become fatigued. Okay, so if someone was to go and get a blood test for diabetes, they're not going to show positive for it until they've got type 2 diabetes. Okay, the precursor things that get tested for before the pancreas has actually packed itself in, are things like cholesterol and things like waist size, and some other markers, some other blood test markers, but it will not show up that the pancreas has failed or is failing until it's almost so destroyed. Does that make sense? So blood tests are really great for showing acute levels of clinical glandular failure, but you'll see lots of symptoms of where the glands are just becoming slow and becoming sluggish long before things need to get to a state of clinical failure. And that goes the same for any gland, okay, including the adrenals, including the thyroid, including the ovaries, including anything. All right, and while the gland is in that state, it is absolutely recoverable. All right, things like type 1 diabetes where the gland is dead, obviously that's not recoverable because it can't be brought back to life. But if the gland is sluggish, even to the point of almost failure, it can recover. Okay, so that's this midsection here. If we take a look at the next body shape that we talked about, it was global fat distribution. So not really storing body fat in any one particular area, just kind of everywhere, right? Now, that person might think that they have problems with it here, and that person might think they've got problems with it here, and that might be where they focus. But if they really were to take a look at their body, they would actually see that they're storing body fat globally. And that's always a problem with the thyroid. Okay, so this is the metabolism issue that we're talking about. Now, the thyroid sits just in the neck, and it's responsible for hormones called T3 and T4. Now, like I mentioned before, it's not just talking about the metabolism in terms of fat loss and fat gain, although that's a symptom of a thyroid that is over or underactive. It's actually talking, the thyroid is directly related to how quickly everything is turning over. So if someone has a slow metabolism or a sluggish thyroid that's a little bit, underactive, what do you think their energy might be like? Yeah, slow. Right? How do you think that they might feel in the morning? Slow. Just put slow before everything. Okay, and that's the way that someone might feel at that point. And as that gland continues to overwork and continues to get sluggish, it will continue to throw symptoms like that. Now, what's interesting, hands up, you guys, if you can imagine that there is a place where it's possible to not crave. Yeah, to not crave, to not have cravings for foods. Has any of you ever been there before, where you've actually gotten to a place where you've had no cravings? No? Okay. Does anyone believe that this is a possible place to be in? I'll see it. I'll believe it when I see it. Okay. Let me tell you an interesting thing about cravings. There are only ever 2 reasons why you might crave something. Just 2. One of them is if your blood sugars drop. Okay. If your blood sugars drop, if you've gone too long without eating, if the types of food that you have eaten have caused your blood sugars to come high too quickly and therefore drop, when you produce this hormone, which will always happen as it's a stress hormone, it's a signal indicating that your blood sugars are low. Who's heard of hangry before? Yeah? Hangry, grumpy, hungry, that's this hormone. Communicating to you in the only way that it knows how to tell your body that your blood sugars must come up. Okay? And what are the types of foods that you crave when you're hangry? Chocolate? What else? What types of foods might you reach for, say, at about 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Or maybe just as you're pulling up in the driveway at about 5, 6 o'clock just before dinner? Chips, yeah? Cheese and crackers, whatever you can get your hands on. Just food, anything that's fast, right? Because those are the types of foods that will get your blood sugars up. And so those are the foods that you will go looking for. Okay, so if you're hungry, that's the first. Now the second one is nutrient deficiency hunger cravings. Alright, now what's real interesting is that each of these different glands need specific nutrients. Alright, so for example, when it comes to the ovaries, they so need essential fats, it's not even funny. And essential fats they can be quite challenging to get into the diet, because most specifically we're looking at the fat which is called DHA, which is an omega-3 or a polyunsaturated fat, which is found in fish. Now, how often do we eat salmon? Maybe once a week? Maybe once a fortnight? And if you take 100 grams of salmon, you get 1 gram of fish, 1 gram of DHA, of omega-3, 1 gram. Alright? Now, just to give you an indicator, when I was pregnant, which is crazy because it was only less than 2 weeks ago, 7 grams of DHA was passing through into the placenta, just for the baby. Just for the baby. What about me? 7 grams a day. Yeah? 7 grams of... It's a whole lot of salmon. What about calcium and magnesium? That's what the adrenals need. Now, what's interesting is that when you train, it is impossible for you to replace the minerals that you sweat out. Alright, through just food alone, it's impossible to replace it. You can give it a really, really good go, but over time what happens is that if you become calcium and magnesium deficient, guess what foods that you eat will trigger that craving? Chocolate. Okay, so at that time of the month is quite typical to crave chocolate. And it's also the very same food that triggers serotonin. It has that exact same response. And now if we're low in calcium and magnesium, then we're low in serotonin, and we'll look for it in things that are creamy or dairy based. Like you'll notice that the sweet things that you might crave are not necessarily like lollies, but there might be the more sweet, creamier things like cream cheese or ice cream, or yeah. When we're talking about the thyroid, it's a little bit different again. If everything is slow, which foods are our energy-based foods? Which food group? Carbohydrates, proteins, or fats? Carbs. Carbs are our energy-based foods. And so the types of foods that you crave when you have a slow metabolism are sweet things like lollies or pastry, carbohydrates like starchy breads, potatoes, those sorts of things. So can you imagine if you didn't address which was your underlying weakness? It would be very different if I was to say to maybe someone who had a slow metabolism, maybe someone who had a sluggish thyroid. If I said to them, hey, you know what, you got to give up carbs. All right, you got to stop eating carbs and coffee. All right, and they're like, seriously, coffee is like the only energy that I will get in my day. Yeah, I would notice on average for someone that has a sluggish thyroid, at least 2 to 3 cups of coffee a day. And if it's really slow, what can happen is that starts to creep up to like 4 or 5 or 6 cups of coffee a day, because that's the only place that person is able to get energy. Yeah, so imagine if I said to someone who had a sluggish thyroid, no more coffee, right? As opposed to say this person, no more coffee, not such a big deal. But for this person, taking away the only energy source that they have. Okay, so when it comes to things like cravings, it's really vital to know what it is that actually needs replacing, so that you are aware of what are your triggers for those certain foods, and this will play a huge role in moving forward towards any type of a goal. Okay, whether it be just to maintain your health or to improve your health. When I talk about fat loss, it's interesting because there's only 2 fuels that the body can run off. There's only 2. Does anyone know what they are? One of them's sugar, the other one's fat. Yep, those are the only 2 possible fuels that your body can run off. So if you have excess body fat, right, and you're not losing it, which one of the 2 is your body always running off of? Sugar and carbohydrates. Okay, so if you have excess fat and you're not losing it, that means that your body is always running off of sugar as its main source of fuel. If you don't have excessive fat to lose, if you were completely happy with your body fat, you still want your body to use a combination of sugar and fat, only it wouldn't be stored fat, it would be dietary fat. Okay, but it is not healthy to have your body constantly running off of sugar. Which do you think out of the 2 is the most inflammatory? Okay, which out of the 2 possible fuels would cause the most amount of inflammation? Sugar. All right, and so when do you think that your body is actually using fat as its sole source of fuel? When in a 24-hour period do you think you actually are burning the most fat? During your sleep. That's exactly right. How slow are you moving when you're unconscious? Right? Fat's such a slow burning fuel. So predominantly during the day our bodies are running off of sugar. Sometimes it'll switch into using fat for a period of time. Alright? But what we want is that during the night our body is actually running off of fat. It is low inflammation, and what it means is that as your body does its natural recovery, right? So recovering things like all your cells and your nerves and your arteries, just all those things that have to be recovered, day to day. Optimally, if we can have our body triggering the hormones that tell our body to use our stored fat or dietary fat to repair those organs, much better, because low inflammation. So let me give you an example of when something is trying to heal when there's inflammation. Imagine you've got a little sore on your hand, okay? And the best naturopath in the world, the best holistic medical doctor person, gave you the most amazing potions and creams and things from the Amazon rainforest and dug it up from the ground, and it was mineral rich, and it was just the best ever to put on the sore to heal it, right? And you had that cream to put on the sore. But every day that you put it on the sore, you also scratched it. Okay, what's happening there is that you haven't taken away the inflammation. So will that sore heal? No, you might take away some symptoms, but you will not have that actual sore heal until you take away the inflammation. So when it comes to the body losing fat in a healthy way, because there are many ways to skin a cat, there are many ways to lose fat, but when you get your body to lose fat in a healthy way, you're actually triggering the body to produce more growth and recovery hormones in the evening, so that when you sleep, your body is using your stored fat as a fuel to repair anything that might be potentially damaged. Okay? Now what this means when you do it this way, it plays a huge difference in weight maintenance, okay, and how well that you're able to maintain your weight, okay? Which is hugely different, because if you were to do it another way, which is counting calories and doing it in those kinds of ways, you force the body to lose fat. And when you force the body to lose fat, it becomes quite stressed. And which is the stress hormone? So what happens afterwards? The weight just comes back on. Who's experienced that before? Yeah? This yo-yo? So it's got to be addressed in the way of health. Health actually needs to become a value. All right? Now, when I was telling you a little bit about my story, health was so not a value for me at all. It was so not a value that if someone had said, hey, here's a pill, it's going to do you over a little bit, but it's going to make you skinny, I wouldn't have given a crap. I would have taken it. You know, I would have done anything just to get that body. I would have, because I did not value health. And how could I have valued health with the way that my body, with the state that my body was in at that time? But as I started to learn more and more about how we could actually literally measure health and the improvement of health, and my body started to reflect that, then the more I actually started to value the decisions I was making about food. Okay? Now, our company, Generation Health, we are all about nutrition education. When we start, this is our 6th year in business. When we started 5 years ago, it was with the sole purpose to educate people. Okay, that had to be the primary reason, because what I found is that when people didn't understand, just like how I didn't understand about why I was making certain decisions about the different foods that I was eating, if I didn't understand what was actually happening there and what was happening with that internally, I did not value that action. Okay, so if you've seen a nutritionist before, as I had seen a nutritionist before, when she would give me a meal plan, I would follow that meal plan and I would get a result. The thing about meal plans is if there's no education alongside that meal plan, then you will not value the things that the best nutritionist in the world could possibly be handing you over in that plan. Okay, so it's all in the education. So what we do, what our company does is we take people through a 12-week course. All right, and in that course we've got 22 health coaches, which are all around New Zealand, and what each of our coaches do is they actually take people through this course at the same time as addressing their food and their diet, making one decision at a time with the changes to do with their food based on whatever it is that needs to be addressed for that particular body type. Does that make sense? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Nick pass around I'm going to have this lady here pass around that in a second. What we have is a body type quiz. Now, on our website, what we've done is I've got a whole bunch of different questions to do with symptoms that you may be experiencing that are, you know, when we take a look at fat, for example, fat is just one symptom. It's one symptom of many. There will be many other symptoms that are a precursor to your body storing fat. And so those are the symptoms that we're most interested in. Okay, so in this quiz, it'll ask you a bunch of questions. It'll say, do you experience da 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 da, A, B, C, or D? You circle which one is the most relevant for you. And at the end of the quiz, it'll tally it all up, and it'll give you how much of a score you are scoring in thyroid-like symptoms, adrenal-like symptoms, or estrogen-type symptoms, and so forth. And then from there, what will happen is that you'll be able, if you choose, to have a free consultation. Okay, so the consultation is 45 minutes to an hour, and that's at no charge. All right, so that's what we offer. We really, really value our service. And so because we take a slightly different approach, being education based, we really want to make sure that just in the consultation that you get value, okay, and that when you walk away from that consultation that you feel like you know exactly what's up, how it needs to be addressed, and what the steps are to move forward, and what kind of a result that you can expect. It's at that point that we go, okay, we feel like we've given enough value. If you choose to work with us, you can take it from there. How does that sound? Good? Okay. So we'll pass around this form, and if you're interested in receiving the body type quiz, just put your name and your email address, and then we'll send that out to you, and you just fill it out online. Okay. Hey, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, like I said, my 3rd trip out of the house since I had my baby last week. So it was a bit of an outing for me, quite exciting. But yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just wanted, I'd spent a little bit of time with Tarryn and got little snippets of information from her, and I was desperate to know more, and I just thought it was something that would be so helpful to everybody. Like, I learnt enough to start understanding what was going on with me. So I think all all women probably experience similar things. So if you think that this sort of stuff would help a friend who just can't seem to get it right or whatever, spread the word so that they can learn and
Yeah,
be more in control as
yeah,
well.
absolutely. Forward the link on to a friend if you want them to fill out the body type quiz as well. Awesome.
Is there any questions for Tarryn?
Yeah, does anyone have any questions?
Pick her brain. Otherwise she'll be going home and won't be leaving the house again.
All right, cool. Do you want to start recording?
Yeah.